What's up, everyone? Welcome to another edition of Processing Blue, where Mike, what do we do?
We process blue for you.
That's right. He's Mike Kaye. I'm Alex Zetlow. We're Carolina Panthers beat writers for the Charlotte Observer. We have a great show for you today. We'll run down the injured state of the offensive line. We'll ever so briefly discuss what went wrong with the Buffalo Bills and on that horrid Sunday. I got a question about quarterbacks for Mike. We'll get an early look at the trade deadline and more. But first, Mike, I'm dying to ask. My guy, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, is reportedly signing with the Pittsburgh Steelers, giving one of my favorite free agent receivers from earlier this year a home. Mike, did you pop a bottle of champagne with me yesterday?
No, but I think that's what happens when you play the Packers. You realize you need some extra offensive oomph before you head over to the rest of the season. But yeah, Marquez Valdez-Scantling,
MVS, baby. MVS. Okay, yeah, I kind of propped that on you. Thank you for being a good sport about that. Anyway, let's get into it. And let's start with some bad news. Why don't we? If you're a Panthers fan, you had 4 injuries to be scared about coming out of Sunday's contest. And no, none of it was the team's ego after the 40-9 bludgeoning loss. The first is Trevin Wallace, the starting inside linebacker who has grown a ton this year, was evaluated for a concussion, got cleared of that concussion, but still didn't return to the game with a stinger on his right side. And then you got 3 offensive linemen that this Panthers team is going to be monitoring throughout the week. Starting center Cade Mays exited the game with an ankle injury and didn't return. Starting right tackle Taylor Moton suffered a knee injury. And then right guard Brady Christensen suffered an Achilles injury. Head coach Dave Canales said it is believed to be a ruptured Achilles, and he might not return for the rest of the season if so. So, Mike, I'm going to hand the floor over to you. You wrote, I do want to mention, you did write about Christensen after the game, and he's someone that you have written about a lot through his time in Carolina. Is losing him in some ways just like a massive loss for this offense? Can you kind of go in depth on that?
Sure. I think that Brady is someone who is really a calming factor behind the scenes. I think he's extremely well liked by his teammates. And, having the versatility that he has, he can clear up a lot of holes, right? So with the Panthers now, they might have to use their 4th starting right guard of the season. It's week 9. So it's starting to feel a little bit like 2022. In that regard, they're much more talented. But losing Christensen really takes away the ability to move the pieces around. Austin Corbett, if he plays at right guard and Cade Mays is fine at center, that's fine. The backing is what's the concern here. If Damian Lewis has to miss another game, if Taylor Moton has to miss another game. Oddly enough, Ike Ekwonu has only missed 1 game, and it was the opener. So they've lost a Swiss Army knife from the standpoint of versatility on that offensive line. But I also think, Brady's someone who has been through, the ringer. He's played every position on the line. He's been passed over for the starting center job. He's been passed over for the swing tackle job, the week 1 left tackle job. He's done anything they've asked him to do. He's a really good person. I think you and I have gotten to know him quite a bit. Always has an upbeat attitude, no matter what's going on. Saw him after the game on Sunday, still was chipper, still wasn't down on himself, or at least outwardly. And so I think the O-line's going to miss him on the sideline these next few weeks. He'll probably come back after he has surgery and be around the offensive line group. But he is somebody who I think has a lot of internal value from a program building sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about this Bills game, and we'll get into that. And then, of course, we'll also get into Bryce Young's ankle injury. Don't worry, we have plenty of things to say about that as well. Mike, I don't really know what we can really discern from or extract from this Bills game outside of the fact that, hey, when it rains in Carolina, it pours this year for some reason. This team in pretty much all 4 of their losses outside of the Arizona game when they had to come back from a ton. It's just been blowouts, pretty much exclusively. I want you to kind of answer this question through this prism. The Panthers' leadership council met with Dave Canales and other Panthers coaches on Monday morning in lieu of team meetings. The same sort of thing happened on the Monday after the Patriots blowout 4 weeks ago. And so take this whichever direction you'd like. If you're Derek Brown, if you're Bryce Young, JJ Jansen, Christian Roseboom, Chuba Hubbard, JC Horn, if you're any of those players in this leadership council and you were part of that meeting, what do you say to each other after Sunday?
Well, just to clarify, this meeting was set up and scheduled no matter what happened against the Bills. They're doing this quarterly. This is their quarterly report, right? Like most people have their quarterly reviews. That's what this is.
Got it.
And my understanding is the council is pretty heavy. There are a lot of people in there. So a lot of players are weighing in on this. And I think if you're a player on defense, you say, we just got run over. The Bills, give them credit. They did an incredible job blocking for James Cook. But the reality is, after 3 games of giving up 131 yards, before halftime, James Cook had 146 yards by himself.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's something that can snowball. It felt a lot like last year when they gave up a historic amount of rushing yards. And so the Panthers really have to look at themselves in the mirror and say, look, we've improved so much against the run. We can't let this one major blip be the deciding factor, because you're going to go up against Josh Jacobs and Emmanuel Wilson this week in Green Bay, and they are very good. They're a very good tandem. Emmanuel Wilson, who's from Charlotte, basically closed out the game on Sunday night against the Steelers. So for the Panthers, I think you have to do a gut check on your toughness, but also on your fundamentals. Offensively, listen, it was the backup quarterback who was in there, and I know we've been pretty effusive in our praise of what Andy Dalton does behind the scenes, his deep ball accuracy, all that, but he looked basically unplayable on Sunday. And we'll get into that a little bit more later, but I think if you're the offense, you say, man, I hope Bryce gets back soon, because Bryce, and this showed this past game, Bryce covers up a lot of the scars. So I'll give you a stat. Bryce Young has been sacked 11 times this year. Coming into this game, the Panthers O-line, or in general, they had given up 12 sacks on the season. On Sunday, Andy Dalton was sacked 7 times.
Whew!
So, like, almost half of the total from the first 7 games. So I think, Bryce's escapability, we've brought up his ability to manipulate the pocket, step up and make plays happen, extend drives. Sometimes that leads to pressure. Sometimes that leads to faulty throws. Sometimes that leads to sacks. But having the imagination, so to speak, behind the line of scrimmage is helpful for this Panthers offense, especially as the offensive line is so banged up and could be on their 4th right guard. They're technically their first center, but also basically their 3rd, because Austin didn't inherit the job. Potentially
right.
Josh Nijman at right tackle. Like, there are so many cogs in this machine that are dealing with injuries or ailments or question marks. And, Bryce Young, while he has his lumps, also, hides some of the lumps elsewhere.
Yeah. Let's get more into this Bryce Young and Andy Dalton conversation. And you kind of hit on several of the points that I was hoping we would already make, but I'm sure you have more to say about all this. Just real quick, Andy Dalton, 16 of 24 for 175 yards, 1 interception, 2 fumbles, was sacked 7 times, as you mentioned. Golly, I did not realize it was that much. With a quarterback rating of 70.7. He said after the game, I believe this is a direct quote, that I just didn't give my team a chance to win. And just from an emotional side of things, before we get into the technical side of things, I saw a 37-year-old quarterback who I believe is turning 38 this week, if not today on Wednesday. If you're listening to it, I'll double check that. But you have this veteran quarterback who every time he's about to either get the start because Bryce is injured or because of whatever, he says you never know when your last time is going to be when you start a game. And after the game, you saw a quarterback who was facing his own mortality and was like going through his head like, hey, I for as someone who grew up watching Andy Dalton kind of like build this TCU program from obscurity and making it into the program that it is now through what he did in Cincinnati and all these things. There was a moment of oh my goodness, I wonder if he's thinking this is his last time and the emotions that come with that. Mike, do you have anything in addition to say about that whole side of the Andy Dalton, Bryce Young thing, or do you have anything else to add to this Bryce Young, Andy Dalton saga? And I know that Bryce Young is still dealing with an ankle injury. If he can get in the game, the Panthers will want him to. But I don't know. I just kind of want to toss the floor to you and give you the ball about the Panthers quarterback situation.
Well, first I'll touch on Dalton because I think you eloquently brought up the stakes of this whole thing. Andy and I are the same age. We graduated college the same year. I've been very well aware of his. I think he's one of the most underrated quarterbacks of his generation. He's top 26 all time in passing touchdowns. He's, I believe, 6th on the current all-time list. Same with in passing yardage. He's passing touchdowns, 7th all time, or at least currently playing. From a standpoint of passing yardage, one of my favorite stats from the Frank Reich era is he had more passing yardage by himself than Frank Reich and Josh McCown had put together.
Mm.
You know, you feel for a guy, especially as we've gotten to know him over the last 3 years. And, you know, he's a guy that I think a lot of people respect in that building. I think he's done wonders for Bryce behind the scenes. I thought this was the worst I've ever seen him play. Really. I mean, he looked lethargic in the pocket. He looked unsure of himself. There weren't a lot of deep throws. Unless he was throwing to T-Mac, there was really nothing going on offensively. It was a shame. It was tough to watch. That said, I do think Bryce Young has an opportunity here in that we have seen the offense without him bomb. And Bryce, for some of his faults, has really kept the ship afloat. He's got 11 touchdowns to 5 interceptions. That's a good ratio right now, especially considering where this team started. He has put on the playmaking ability. He has elevated the product. At least in that Dallas game was a really strong performance from him. The comeback against Miami was really terrific too. You could argue that in some games they have had to come back because of his early struggles and he's a late gamer. But the reality is he has won 4 games and only lost 3 as a starter this year. So he's above 500 as a starter. I think he's shown a lot of progress. I think he is covered up for a lot of the play calling gaffes. I also think that he has mitigated the disasters when he hasn't. And look, I mean, this offensive line is banged up. They need somebody with some sort of mobility, and Andy Dalton clearly doesn't have that anymore. So I think the Panthers have to hone in on what Bryce does well down the stretch. I had them winning 7 games. You had them winning 8. Those are both attainable right now, especially with 2 dates against the Saints on the docket.
Yep.
This division race and this playoff race has always been about, can you beat the NFC South or at least split while taking advantage of playing other mediocre teams? The first half of the season, they did a very good job of beating up on other mediocre teams. The rest of the schedule outside of New Orleans and maybe the other Atlanta Falcons matchup, there are not a lot of mediocre teams. Seattle, San Francisco, Tampa Bay is looking really good. And then you have that late bye week, right? Like the first bye week, the bye week for them is the first week of December.
Yeah.
I feel like that's we've said it several times. That's not optimal, even though Dave Canales likes to say, well, then we're rested up for the playoff run. Well, if you can't survive your offensive line injuries before then, it's just not going to help.
Right.
But I think as far as the quarterback thing is concerned, I've never heard of somebody having a high ankle. I don't know why I'm like so obsessed with this. I've never heard of anybody having a high ankle sprain and being out of a boot after 2 days. He looked fine. There was no sense of a limp. Maybe he was in pain, but his mobility was fine. And so I didn't doubt that he was not going to play that last week. I mean, I think that was the smart move, but I do have a lot of hope that he will play this week. It's probably a 50-50 shot. And I think the Panthers are really hoping that he can push himself and get back on the field. But the problem is, if you take away his mobility behind the line of scrimmage
Right.
and in the pocket, you are taking away his one special trait. And so he can't just be a pocket passer. He's very small. He tends to, his vision's fine for a smaller quarterback. He also has a high release, but you don't want him to be a sitting duck back there, especially with the offensive line the way it is, or you'll just get more of the same from last week. So the hope is that he can move around effectively and then, do what he does. Because otherwise, you're asking him to be a very standard pocket passer, and that's not advantageous for a guy who, A, thrives on throwing on the run, and B, is of the shorter variety, relatively speaking, at quarterback.
I love that final point that you made. Another thing that has helped Bryce a lot in the last 3 games that he's played is the Panthers have found a way to establish the run and have been able to do so really effectively. With Rico Dowdle back there against the Jets, they split series with Rico Dowdle and Chuba Hubbard to less avail, but still the defense came through and the run game was good enough to win them that game. We have litigated this. I know it's my favorite word. We have litigated this probably 5 times in the last 4 shows because I think Scott and I did a double time. I don't even know. But it seems like there's been a new development, at least after talking to Dave Canales on Monday. The same question was posed, hey, do you think that the splitting of the running backs will work again? Will you use that same plan against the Packers? And Canales, interestingly, said that while he has not talked to the running backs about this yet, he did say, quote, we cannot ignore the fact that Rico has been exceptional. We then talked to Chuba Hubbard afterward on Monday, and he said, quote, whether it's 70-30, 50-50, 100 my way or 100 Rico's way, whatever it is, my focus is winning. And then he goes on to say that his main focus has never been on me. It has always been about the team. So, Mike, is this a moment of changing? Is this a changing of the guard moment? Is this the week where Rico Dowdle gets 70% of the carries? Or is at least the starter? And if that is true, will we see a newly inspired Panthers run game?
I think it has to be. I think it's very hard to ignore that Chuba has just not been as effective as Rico.
Yeah.
Rico's averaging 5.3 yards per carry since Chuba came back. Chuba's averaging 2.5 yards per carry. So that's more than double what he is producing. I think Chuba was being very sincere and honest in saying that he was about the team. This guy is I've said this several times on the podcast. Do not conflate leadership with captainship or captaincy.
Yep. Like captaincy, yeah, whatever.
Captaincy, whatever. Somebody will focus on me saying 3 cuts in this podcast. I'm not worried about captaincy. So what I'll say is I think Chuba. And Dave Canales alluded to this multiple times. He has been the tone setter in the locker room, on the field. He's a guy who's broken down the huddle. He's a guy that they've depended on a lot. He helped Dave Canales get through that first season because they leaned on him a ton last year. And I think he set the tone from a work ethic standpoint. We always talk about and see him out there on the jugs machine with Tommy Tremble. Those 2 guys are clear glue character guys. And I think it's tough when you have to do that. But then again, he didn't blink when he had to sit Austin Corbett after he started at center and lost his job due to injury. He didn't really blink when he benched Bryce Young after 2 games.
Mm-hmm.
At some point, if the guy's a true leader and is about winning and is about the program, he does the right thing. It's impossible. So one thing I do want to touch on, everybody said that Rico is the more talented running back and that he's doing a lot of things. I think the thought process from Canales was against Miami, against Dallas, those were 2 terrible run defenses, and the offensive line was blocking incredibly well.
Yep.
There were holes so big, we joked that Fowler could rush for 5 yards. What happened in those games were not an anomaly, but they were in spite of the running back. These past 2 games are impossible to ignore because it seems like Rico's running like he's never going to carry the ball ever again. And so I'm curious to see how a switch would affect that because Rico is running for his life, or his football life out there. He's on a 1-year contract. He wants to be a starting running back in the league. He does not want to metaphorically carry a clipboard. He wants to be out there getting 25 to 30 touches a game. And so far, during October, he hasn't turned into a pumpkin. He has been scary in a lot of ways as we approach Halloween. And if I'm an opposing defense, he's one of the guys that actually scares me on this offense. It's Rico and it's McMillan. It looks like Chuba's been a little tentative to hit holes. It just feels like he's like a tick off. He doesn't look like himself. And I'm wondering if the calf injury is lingering. You know, everybody says they're healthy, but everybody's beaten up, right? Like everybody's taking their lumps. And so I'm a little concerned that Hubbard pushed his way back too soon because he is a team guy. And I think if you can have Rico handle the lion's share, because again, it's those first 2 games of the month, they're awesome. But we've also seen guys be flash for a couple of games and then disappear. What's been really impressive to me is how Rico has handled himself in an untenable situation, not getting to rev up, not getting to touch the ball early, and still be productive. And that you can't ignore. And I think, Dave Canales wanted to give Chuba every chance to prove everybody else wrong. And I don't think they lost the game against the Bills because of this rotation, but you want to say to yourself, you want to get off on the right foot. You want to get explosive plays. You want to own the momentum early, especially because Bryce Young hasn't played particularly well early in games. So if you can ride the running game and then let, Bryce put on his cape in the second half, then you've got a pretty complementary offense and you've got a good strategy there. Rico's earned this if they are to make a switch. Point blank, period. If they don't do this, I think it becomes a problem. Now, I've seen people say, do you think they'll lose the locker room? No, Chuba's beloved. But everybody can see what's happening here. And if you're taking a leadership council at its word and people are being honest, it's very clear that Rico Dowdle should be steering the ship at running back.
I think that's a wonderful answer. And I think that's a really good way to put a pin on it. I just loved your point about Rico Dowdle being a free agent next year and being on a 1-year deal because, as Panthers fans remember, Chuba Hubbard had an 1,100-yard year in 15 games being on the final year of his contract, and that yielded a 4-year extension. I'm certainly not saying that things have changed because now he's on a 4-year deal and everything's fine, but I'm just saying running backs and really any player, like, when you don't know where your next home is, things change, things happen. Rico's running exactly like that. You want to talk about the Packers?
Oh, sure. Yeah, they're fun. They are really fun.
They are averaging, yeah, I know. Just watching them has been really interesting. They're averaging 27.6 points per game. That's 5th in the league. They also have a top 10 defense, allowing just 289.4 yards per game, total yards per game. They got Michael Parsons. They got Jordan Love. You mentioned the running back room led by Josh Jacobs. The run defense is actually also really good too. And that was the thing that Jerry Jones was talking about, why Michael Parsons was dispensable. Yeah, he's a good pass rusher, but he's not as good of a run stopper. Well, that narrative is being flipped as we speak over in Green Bay. Mike, do you have a quick prediction before we get into the end of the show, yeah, you start out because I've been starting out the past couple weeks and I've been making a fool of myself. Both of us were correct last week while Fowler wasn't. He predicted the Panthers to defeat the Bills, but anyway, I just need every advantage I can get. So who you got this week?
I've got the Packers. I think this is a game no matter who the quarterback is, and obviously we don't know who the quarterback is. I just feel that the Packers are they're a wagon. They're going to be a train that runs over a lot in their path, and I think that it's going to be a 2-score game. I'm going to go 31-20 Packers. I just think the Packers are one of the top 2 or 3 teams in the NFC, and really they're the big threat to the Eagles at this point.
I too think the Packers are going to win. I have it as a bit closer though, 31-28. I just know that every time after a blowout loss in the NFL, teams tend to right size and tend to refocus, and that happened after the Patriots game, certainly with the Panthers, and so I'm going to expect something similar to that. We are not going to have a podcast, at least I'm pretty sure, we're not going to have a podcast before the trade deadline occurs. So, Mike, I wanted to give you some room. Do the Panthers do something at the deadline, or do they stay put?
Well, I'll start with being sellers. I do not expect them to be sellers. They'll either be 4-5 or 5-4 at Tuesday's trade deadline. So they're still going to be in the playoff hunt. I don't know that they really have any trade chips. It's not like the Jonathan Mingo thing kind of it was something that brewed for a couple of weeks behind the scenes, and they just found one sucker, basically, to put it like. I don't see a Deontay Johnson-like trade, obviously. I think that Dan Morgan really treasures draft picks, so I would be very surprised if he made a move. I think they know what they are. If they are a cusp of the playoffs team, I don't know that it makes sense to thwart future assets. I did throw this out in a mailbag on Tuesday. Arden Key on the Titans, he's been dealing with an injury, soft tissue injury the last couple of weeks, but he's a guy who's been pretty productive. I think he has 14 sacks over the last 3 seasons. Could make sense as a rotational pass rusher. I know some people are going to say, hey, they should look into the offensive line, but teams don't typically trade away good offensive line talent because even if you are, struggling or a bad team, you still want to protect your quarterback. So like a team like the Titans probably isn't going to trade away an offensive lineman and mess with Cam Ward's season and his development. So you're probably looking at pass rusher. I've spoken to some people around the league. They don't expect, they think that there's going to be kind of a supply and demand issue. The teams that are typically going to jump at the opportunity to upgrade their roster, the Eagles, the 49ers, those guys are going to be aggressive. But for Dan Morgan, who has really cherished these draft picks and also now has a draft class that seems to be pretty good, the most I could see him doing is maybe swapping a 6th for a 7th. I just don't think that there's a lot out there for them to upgrade. They're not a player away. They do have a lot of young players they're trying to develop. I think the safety market's come and gone. I think the cornerback market probably doesn't factor in for them. They really like Corey Thornton a lot. They like Shaw Smith-Wade a lot behind Mike Jackson, J.C. Horn. The defensive line's kind of figured itself out a little bit, and they've got a lot of money invested in it. So I think, with wide receiver being what it is, tight end being what it is, I mean, they've got Hunter Renfrow and James Mitchell inactive. That tells you how much depth they have there, or
Right.
young depth. Really, the only spot I could see them potentially upgrading in a minor role would be Arden Key or a guy of that ilk at pass rusher.
Cool. Good stuff. Book it. Mike, anything else that we should tell our wonderful and beautiful listeners before we get out of here?
Yeah, if you're FC and Panthers fans, Alex wrote a terrific story about the flipping of the field for their playoff game, which would happen before this podcast is up, but I still think that it's not to make a turf joke, but it's evergreen. You could enjoy it whenever you get to charlotteobserver.com. Check that out. Remember, we do weekly mailbags. We're always detailing everything on Mondays and Wednesdays in our notebooks. Got some great features coming down the pike. tune into charlotteobserver.com, a wonderful website.
Yeah, absolutely. And I promise you, I did not set Mike up so he could, plug my stories. But hey, here we are. Thanks as always for listening to our pontifications on all things Panthers with Mike Kaye and myself and our wonderful producer, Zach Dennis. Please subscribe and follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts by searching Processing Blue. And if you watch us on YouTube, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and click on the bell icon to get notified whenever new episodes drop. And finally, please be sure to stick to charlotteobserver.com for all of your Panthers needs. Mike, stay humble, stay creative, and keep processing.
That's a wrap.